In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can use Nintex Workflow Cloud to build and implement a Contact Us or product help request form into your website. If you'd like to download a copy of this template, you can do so over at gallery.nintex.com under the Workflow sections and under Nintex Workflow Cloud. After you've entered your tenant ID, you can scroll down and find the Contact Us template and download it directly into your environment. While the template will provide you with a framework to get started, in this video we're actually going to start from scratch and look at what it would take to build this process from nothing. Here on the designer, we'll go ahead and click on our Start event. Once we've selected Form, we first need to update our configuration so that anyone with this form URL has access to view and submit data. This is going to be important if we want to host this on a public-facing website. We'll then select Design Form, and this will open the Nintex Workflow Cloud Form Designer. The first thing that we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll grab a label control and drag that onto the form canvas. This will be our title, and so we'll go ahead and give it the text of Contact Us, and then we can add some formatting to make it a little bit bolder. We next want to add somewhat of a subheader to ask if the customers have already seen some of the scale resources we have available. And we'll give it a slightly smaller header. We can also change the positional formatting of our text within our label controls. In this case, let's go ahead and set this guy to the top so that those two titles are a little bit closer together. And then to showcase the scale resources that our customer may or may not have seen, we'll go ahead and add a couple more label controls and throw in some hyperlinks that'll get them to the right place. In this example, I'm just going to link these back to Google. However, in your site, you can provide them links back to your scale resources. Now, if the scale resources don't solve the customer's issue, we need to understand why they're reaching out to us. To do this, we'll use a choice single control. So we'll drag that onto the canvas, and then we'll update this title to haven't found what you're looking for, what can we help you with? And as you'll notice, the name property reflects what is shown in the title, and in this case, that's a little bit long. So let's go ahead and we'll customize this, and we'll just call it their request type. We'll then go ahead and populate in our different options. And instead of radio buttons, I'm going to turn this into a drop-down list as I think it looks a little bit cleaner. And we'll set our display please select to yes. Next, we're going to add several different fields that will allow us to capture the contact information from the user. However, we don't want these fields to show up until a request type has been selected. And to do that, we're going to actually nest all of these controls inside a group control, which will make it a little bit easier to manage our hide and show rules later in this walkthrough. While we could have various different groups of controls based on the request type selected, in this particular example, we're just going to have a standard set of contact fields that will be visible regardless of what request type is selected. We'll then go ahead and drag over the controls for capturing our contact information. In this case, I'm going to be using a text short control for the first name, last name, and subject. We have a dedicated email control that will make sure that email formats are entered correctly. And then I'll use a text long control to capture the description of the request. It's also important that as we're configuring these controls, we set their required value to yes, as it wouldn't do us any good for someone to submit this form without providing this information. Finally, some of these requests might require a file to be uploaded, and so we can add a file attachment control and a toggle that lets us know if they've actually added a file attachment. While we know that this is going to be an embedded form and we'll be able to utilize the footer of our website, if we were using this on a standalone page, we actually could also build in somewhat of a footer for our Contact Us form so that people know other information about the company. To do this, we can throw on a couple different label controls, and then in these we could provide information such as products, company information, legal information about our company, as well as our address. While I'm not going to populate the details in this example, this gives a sense of how you can leverage the label control for various different scenarios. If we go ahead and preview our form, we can now see how all of our controls look on the page. However, like we talked about earlier, we don't want the contact fields to show up until they've actually selected a request type. To dynamically show or hide information on a form, we need to leverage a rule. So let's go ahead and jump over into the Rules tab and take a look at how we can build that. Under Form Rules, go ahead and select Add New. We'll give this rule a name, and form rules within Nintex Workflow Clouds work as a combination of ifs and thens. So in this case, we'll say if request type equals, and then we've got our drop-down of values. And so because we want it to equal any of those values, we actually need to add some ors in here. So we'll go ahead and add a couple of these. And then what we can do is we can update them all to be request type equals, and we'll select the various different options from our dropdown. In this way, we will be able to say if the request type equals software support, or the request type equals service support, or the request type equals request for partnership, etc., we will still be able to have the then trigger correctly. Within our then configuration, we want to set it up so that group 1 visible is yes, else group 1 is visible no. Now, while this rule works, to make it a little bit easier to understand, let's actually jump back into the designer, find group 1, and let's go ahead and update that name. In this case, we'll call it contact fields. And once we've made that update, if we look back at our rule, we can see that that has automatically updated for us, making it quite a bit easier to understand. And with that, our request form is now complete. While we could just take this form and embed it directly into our website, we actually want to do something with the data that we're capturing. So let's go ahead and now take a look at how we can build the workflow that'll operate behind this form. Because Nintex Workflow Cloud has the ability to integrate with various different systems of record, we can do some pretty dynamic work within our workflow. In this case, I actually want to understand if the person submitting the form is an existing contact within my CRM system. In this case, I'm going to use Salesforce, and we'll go ahead and we will query for an existing contact. To configure this query, I'll be looking at the contact object, and then I want to set a condition of when their email is equal to the email provided in the form, will return the records. And I both want to get a collection of the records returned. In this case, it should only ever be one, but I also want to get a count of the records returned. The reason for getting the count is so that I can then do a branch by condition as the next step in the workflow and determine if an existing contact was found. And the way that we'll do this is we'll say when the count of our contact IDs is greater than 0, then yes, an existing contact was found and we can go down the right branch, else it'll say no and go down the left branch. Let's go ahead and tackle the no branch first. In this case, we're just going to create a Zendesk ticket for the unknown customer. We'll scroll down to Zendesk. Inside the action configuration, we can go ahead and give it a subject of request type, request from first name, last name, so we can leverage these dynamic values that we have. And then in our description, we can let our support team know that we were not able to find an account, but they still submitted a request, and we can provide the details. While I already had a Zendesk connection created in this tenant, if you need to create a new one, you can do so directly from the designer. And then we can also store the ticket ID for use later in the workflow. Now let's go ahead and jump over and take a look at the yes branch. The first step here is going to be extracting the contact ID from the collection that was retrieved via the query. To do this, we'll go into our collection operations and we'll leverage our get item from collection action. To configure this action, we'll select our contact IDs collection. We'll set an index of 0. The reason for this being is that collections start at 0. They do not start at 1. And so to get the first item, we need to pass it the index of 0. And then our store item, we will use a new variable called contact ID. Now, because of how we have our data structured in Salesforce, we actually need to use a couple retrieve a record actions here to get back the contact information, the account information, and then information on the account owner that we will use later in this branch. And each one of these actions will reference an ID that is pulled from the retrieve before it. The account details will leverage the account ID, and the account owner details will leverage the account details action. Once we have our account owner details, including the first name, last name, and email address, we can then go ahead and copy our Zendesk ticket from the No branch and use that as a template in our Yes branch. We, of course, will go ahead and now update some of these details in here as we have information about which account the contact belongs to. As the final action in the Yes branch, we'll go ahead and drag a send an email action onto the canvas, and this will be an alert that we'll send out to the account owner, letting them know that one of their customers has opened a request ticket and that the team is investigating it. As the final action of the workflow, we'll go ahead and actually send a notification back to the requester that submitted the form and let them know that we got their information and that our team is looking into it. This really closes the loop on letting them know that we are taking care of their request. And with that, we've now completed this Contact Us request workflow. Let's go ahead and publish this workflow, and then we'll take a look at how we can easily embed this into our website. We'll go ahead and give this workflow a name, and then I have my environment configured so I always have to leave version comments anytime I publish the workflow. This ensures that as changes are made, we have a log of why users were making updates to the workflow. Once the workflow is published, we then have the URL for the web form, which we can view as a standalone page, or we can actually copy this embed code from NWC and enter it directly into our website. Really quickly, I'm going to jump over to a small website that I have built using a web app called Card, and I'll go ahead and paste my code directly into this embed widget. And then when we view this site live, we can actually see that our form is rendered directly in the web page. And because it's a responsive form, we can actually change the size of this page and the form will respond accordingly. So if I jump back and adjust the width of this div and then republish my website, we can now see that the form has adapted accordingly and we didn't have to make any changes within NWC. I hope this walkthrough has been helpful in your future workflow design, and we can't wait to see what you build next.